What if the Cold War had gone hot? What if a single miscalculation, a single trembling finger, had unleashed fire capable of burning the Earth itself? Tonight, we step into the darkest alternate history, the World War III that almost happened. The story begins not in the 1950s, not even with the Cold War itself. It begins in August 1945. Hiroshima, Nagasaki, two cities turned into infernos in the blink of an eye. For the first time in history, humankind had unlocked the power of the atom, not as a source of light, but as a weapon of death. The blast flattened entire neighborhoods. Temperatures rivaled the surface of the sun. And in that searing light, a new age was born. The United States emerged as the sole nuclear power, a titan armed with something no enemy could match. But this monopoly wouldn't last. Because in the shadows of Moscow, the Soviet Union watched, calculated, and raced to catch up. Joseph Stalin understood. The bomb was not just a weapon. It was a symbol. A ticket to superpower status. By 1949, the Soviets detonated their first atomic device. And just like that, the nuclear club doubled in size. The world split in two. East versus West. Capitalism versus communism. America versus the Soviet Union. Winston Churchill had already warned of an iron curtain falling across Europe. Now that curtain glowed faintly, with the heat of nuclear fire. In Washington, strategists began speaking in apocalyptic terms. The Soviets weren't just a rival ideology. They were an existential threat. In Moscow, the same fear ran deep. The Americans had used the bomb once. They could do it again. Thus began the arms race. Imagine this. By the mid-1950s, each side was not just stockpiling weapons. They were stockpiling the end of the world. War plans were drawn up, charts showing casualty estimates not in thousands, not in millions, but in hundreds of millions. Entire continents erased. The doctrine became clear: mutually assured destruction. Or, as it was coldly nicknamed, MAD. The logic was twisted. If both sides knew that a nuclear war would destroy everyone, then neither would dare to start it. Peace, kept by the threat of annihilation. But what if that logic failed? What if fear turned into miscalculation? What if a radar glitch, a nervous general, or a single mistake lit the fuse? That is the nightmare scenario we are exploring tonight. To understand the scale of danger, consider this. In 1960, the United States had enough nuclear firepower to destroy the Soviet Union several times over. And the Soviets, racing to catch up, deployed their own arsenal aimed straight at American cities. Bombers sat ready on runways, loaded with atomic payloads. Missiles stood in underground silos, waiting for the launch code. Submarines prowled silently beneath the oceans, floating doomsday machines that could strike from anywhere. The world was on a hair trigger. And every year, the chance of catastrophe grew. Children in America practiced duck and cover drills under their desks. Soviet citizens dug bomb shelters in case the sky lit up with fire. Leaders gave speeches about peace, while secretly approving plans to obliterate entire nations. The shadow of the bomb stretched across every life, every decision, every dream. The late 1940s had proven one thing: the atomic age would not remain America's secret. The Soviets had cracked the code. The monopoly was over. But what followed next was more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. The birth of the hydrogen bomb, the atomic bomb, the weapon that leveled Hiroshima and Nagasaki, was already a nightmare. But by the early 1950s, scientists on both sides realized something chilling. The fission bomb was just the beginning. A more powerful design existed, one that didn't just split atoms, but fuse them. The hydrogen bomb. The H-bomb. If the atomic bomb was the equivalent of a matchstick, the hydrogen bomb was a raging inferno. When the US tested its first H-bomb in 1952, the results stunned the world. An island in the Pacific literally vanished beneath the fireball. The explosion was measured in megatons, millions of tons of TNT. A single bomb could now kill millions in seconds. The Soviets responded in kind, detonating their own hydrogen device in 1953. The race was on. No longer about numbers, but about scale. Who could build the bigger bomb, the deadlier weapon, the ultimate symbol of power? By the mid-1950s, both nations were locked in what can only be described as a death spiral of escalation. America deployed bombers like the B-52 Stratofortress, able to carry nuclear warheads anywhere in the world. The Soviets countered with their own long-range aircraft. But soon, the bombers themselves weren't enough. Missile technology promised instant annihilation, with no time for defense. Thus came the Intercontinental Ballistic Missile, the ICBM, a weapon that could cross continents in under 30 minutes, launched from hidden silos buried deep underground, or fired from submarines lurking silently in the deep. The nuclear triad was born: land-based missiles, strategic bombers, submarine-launched weapons. Together, these ensured that no matter who struck first, the other side could strike back. Guaranteed destruction. Guaranteed apocalypse. For ordinary people, this wasn't an abstract theory. It was daily life. In the United States, schools ran duck and cover drills. Children practiced hiding under desks, as if thin wood could stop a nuclear blast. Cities built fallout shelters. Families stocked canned food and water, convinced the day of reckoning could come at any moment. In the Soviet Union, propaganda posters warned citizens to stay vigilant against the imperialist threat. Underground bunkers were dug. Civilians rehearsed for nuclear emergencies. Fear became part of the culture. It shaped music, films, even fashion. A generation grew up with the understanding that tomorrow might be their last. Behind the scenes, generals and politicians wrestled with a paradox. The weapons they were building were so devastating, they could never be used. Yet not building them was unthinkable, because the other side might gain the upper hand. So both nations built more, and more, and more. By the early 1960s, the United States had over 18,000 nuclear warheads. The Soviet Union, racing furiously, had thousands of its own. Each one capable of obliterating a city. Each one waiting for a command that, once given, could not be taken back. The idea was clear: deterrence. Make the cost of war so high that no leader would dare to start it. But deterrence relied on rationality, on calm decision-making, on perfect information. And history has shown us, humans are anything but perfect. Imagine this. It's the middle of the night. A radar operator stares at his screen and sees what looks like hundreds of missiles streaking across the ocean. He has minutes, maybe seconds, to decide. Is it real? Or a glitch? If he calls it wrong, his mistake could kill millions. If he hesitates, his country might be destroyed. This was the nightmare of the nuclear age. Every system, every plan, every strategy rested on split-second decisions made by fallible humans. A power outage. A flock of birds mistaken for incoming missiles. A technical malfunction. Any of these could mean the difference between peace and the end of the world. Even the men at the top weren't immune to fear. American presidents were given the football, a briefcase containing nuclear launch codes, wherever they went. They were told that if the Soviets attacked, they would have just minutes to decide the fate of humanity. In Moscow, the Kremlin carried the same burden. Stalin, Khrushchev, Brezhnev. Each leader knew that one wrong move, one moment of panic, could set the world ablaze. And so they played a deadly game of brinkmanship. Pushing, testing, provoking, but never quite crossing the line. At least, not yet. The nuclear arms race was already terrifying. But history shows, it wasn't just the weapons themselves that nearly doomed us. It was the moments, the miscalculations, the near misses. Times when the world stood seconds away from nuclear fire, and only luck, restraint, or sheer human instinct saved us. The first of these moments came early. 1950. The Korean Peninsula erupted in war. The Communist North invaded the South. The United States and its allies rushed to defend. China soon entered on the north side. What began as a local conflict suddenly threatened to become global. And in Washington, some military leaders had a shocking proposal. Why not use atomic bombs? General Douglas MacArthur, hero of the Pacific, argued for it openly. Drop nuclear weapons on Chinese cities. Cut supply lines. Force surrender. President Harry Truman listened, then recoiled. The memory of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was still raw. He refused. But the fact that the idea was considered seriously, at the highest levels, prove something chilling. Nuclear fire was already on the table. By the late 1950s, another crisis boiled over. Berlin. A city carved in half, West Berlin under Western control, East Berlin trapped behind Soviet lines. For Moscow, this half-city was a constant humiliation. For Washington, it was a symbol of defiance. In 1961, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev issued an ultimatum: leave Berlin. Or else. The US refused. And once again, the world teetered. Tanks rolled into the streets. American and Soviet armor faced each other at Checkpoint Charlie. Guns loaded. Engines roaring. 4 hours, soldiers stood ready, one wrong twitch away from World War III. But then, both sides slowly pulled back. The standoff ended without shots fired. This time, the Cuban Missile Crisis, 13 days to doomsday, but it was 1962 that brought the ultimate test. The moment humanity came closer to extinction than at any point in history. It began with secret intelligence. American spy planes spotted something disturbing on the island of Cuba, just 90 miles from Florida. Soviet nuclear missiles being installed in secret. For President John F. Kennedy, it was an unthinkable threat. Nuclear warheads, within striking distance of Washington, New York, every major city on the East Coast. The response was swift: a naval blockade. The US demanded the missiles be removed. Khrushchev refused. And so began 13 days of terror. Picture it. October 1962. Families everywhere glued to radios and televisions. News reports warning of possible nuclear war. People stocking food, preparing shelters, wondering if tomorrow would even come. In Washington, Kennedy's advisors split. Some pushed for immediate airstrikes, wipe out the missiles before they became operational. Others warned that an attack might trigger full-scale war. In Moscow, Khrushchev faced his own hardliners. Give in. And appear weak. Resist. And risk Armageddon. All the while, Soviet ships carrying more missiles steamed toward Cuba, with US warships ready to stop them by force. On October 27th, the crisis reached its climax. An American U-2 spy plane was shot down over Cuba. At the same time, another U-2 strayed into Soviet airspace. Missiles were ready. Bombers were loaded. The world held its breath. One of Kennedy's generals urged him, strike now. But Kennedy hesitated. He searched for another way. Secretly, a deal was struck. The Soviets would withdraw their missiles from Cuba. In return, the US would quietly remove its missiles from Turkey, near the Soviet border. On October 28th, Khrushchev announced the withdrawal. The crisis was over. But make no mistake, for 13 days, humanity stood one decision away from annihilation. And yet, that wasn't the only time we nearly lost it all. In 1983, Soviet radar detected what looked like a massive US missile launch. The screens showed multiple warheads inbound. The protocol was clear: report immediately, prepare retaliation. But the officer on duty, Stanislav Petrov, hesitated. Something felt off. It didn't make sense that America would launch just a few missiles. So he broke the rules. He reported it as a false alarm. And he was right. It was a malfunction in the early warning system. One man's instinct had saved the world. Real people, real choices, think about that. All the billions spent on missiles, satellites, warheads. And in the end, survival sometimes depended on a single human's judgment call. A radar officer. A submarine captain. A president pacing the floor late at night. Each one holding the fate of millions in their hands. Each one a heartbeat away from starting the unthinkable. We've seen the build-up. The near misses. The moments where the world dangled over the abyss. But what if, just once, the button had been pushed? What if the Cold War had turned nuclear? Tonight, we walk through that terrifying alternate history. Not fantasy, but the cold, hard projections of generals, scientists, and planners who calculated exactly what a nuclear World War III would look like. In the Pentagon, the war plan was codenamed SIOP, the Single Integrated Operational Plan. In Moscow, The equivalent was planned for nuclear war with the imperialists. Both were chillingly detailed. The US plan called for launching thousands of nuclear warheads in the opening hours. Targets: Soviet missile silos, airfields, and command centers. But also cities: Moscow, Leningrad, Kiev. The Soviet plan was nearly identical. Hit US missile fields. Destroy Washington, New York, Chicago. Burn London, Paris, Bonn. Within hours of war starting, tens of millions would be dead. Imagine it. It begins with a radar screen lighting up. The order is given. Keys turn. Missiles roar out of underground silos, leaving trails of fire across the sky. Bombers lift off, heavy with hydrogen bombs. Submarines beneath the Atlantic and Pacific launch silent, deadly payloads. Within 30 minutes, the first wave arrives. New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., Moscow, Leningrad, Kiev, Novosibirsk. Cities gone. Millions vaporized instantly. Those lucky, or unlucky, enough to survive the blast would face something worse. The shockwave rips across entire metro areas. Buildings collapse. Highways twist like toys. People thrown like ragdolls. Then comes the firestorm. Oxygen sucked from the air. Skies igniting into walls of flame. Even underground shelters boiling with heat. In Hiroshima, fire consumed miles of city within minutes. Now multiply that by hundreds. And then, the invisible killer. Radioactive fallout. Particles of ash, dust, and debris lifted high into the atmosphere, glowing with deadly energy. It drifts with the wind, poisoning everything it touches. Crops, rivers, soil. People who survive the initial blasts find themselves sick days later. Vomiting, bleeding, skin peeling from radiation burns. Children born with deformities. Entire generations scarred. But perhaps the most terrifying effect isn't the blast. It's what happens after. Scientists studying these scenarios realized that firestorms would pump smoke and soot high into the stratosphere. Thick, black clouds would circle the globe, blocking sunlight. Temperatures would plunge. Crops would fail. Famine would grip the planet. This was nuclear winter. A world without seasons. A world without food. A world where billions starved in the dark. Governments would crumble. Economies would disintegrate overnight. Law and order would vanish. In the United States, some continuity plans existed. Secret bunkers for leaders under mountains. Caches of supplies. Even doomsday planes designed to command the military while cities burned. But what good is survival when the world around you is gone? The Soviet Union had its own bunkers, deep underground, carved into rock. But the scale of destruction was beyond anyone's control. No nation, no system, no ideology could survive intact. Military projections weren't vague. They had numbers. In a full-scale exchange, US versus USSR, estimates suggested hundreds of millions dead within hours. Another billion within months, from starvation and disease. Civilization itself would be set back centuries. Some scientists argued humanity might never recover. Think about it. Electric grids destroyed. Factories gone. Ports and railroads reduced to rubble. Global trade shattered. And in the chaos, hunger, violence, collapse. The survivors wouldn't be rebuilding. They'd be scavenging. Fighting over scraps. Praying the sky would one day clear. Would anyone survive? This is the haunting question. Some argue that small pockets of humanity could endure, in remote areas far from the blast zones. Rural villages. Isolated islands. Deep underground shelters. But survive. To what end? A poisoned earth. A frozen planet. No infrastructure. No medicine. No technology. What is survival if the world you knew is gone forever? And beyond the physical destruction, there is the mental toll. Imagine watching your city vanish in a flash. Imagine searching through rubble for loved ones, knowing they're gone. Imagine living in endless night, wondering if the sun will ever rise again. Generations traumatized. A species scarred. The very idea of progress, gone. The bombs have fallen. The cities are gone. The world as we knew it has ended. Now begins the aftermath. A grim vision of what life might have looked like if the Cold War had turned nuclear. Survivors in the wasteland imagine waking up to silence. The hum of cars. The buzz of electricity. The chatter of radios. Gone. Instead, collapsed buildings. Bodies in the streets. The sky, a permanent twilight. The survivors crawl from basements, subway tunnels, and caves. Shell-shocked. Starving. Staring at a world they no longer recognize. In some places, local communities might band together. Sharing food. Building makeshift shelters. Trying to cling to the idea of normal life. But in others, survival turns brutal. Looting. Riots. The strong preying on the weak. A descent into savagery. Both the United States and Soviet Union had elaborate plans for survival. In America, deep under the mountains of Virginia, lay Mount Weather, a secret bunker designed to house government leaders. There was also Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado, hardened against nuclear strikes. The Soviets had their own, vast underground complexes near Moscow, built to keep the Politburo alive. But these bunkers could save only a few. A few hundred. Maybe a few thousand. What about the millions outside? The citizens who voted, worked, fought, and paid taxes? They would be left behind, to burn. Even for those inside, survival was a curse. Emerging weeks later, they would find nothing left to govern. No nation. No society. No order. The land itself would betray the survivors. Rivers poisoned by radioactive ash. Fields too toxic to farm. Animals dying, their bodies glowing with fallout. The forests burned. The oceans sickened. The skies dark, filled with soot. And in that darkness, temperatures dropped. Summers turned to winters. Growing seasons vanished. Crops failed, one after another. Wheat, corn, rice, the staples of civilization, gone. Billions would starve. Not just in America or Russia, but across Africa, Asia, Europe, everywhere. Even nations untouched by bombs would wither, their food imports cut off, their skies choked with nuclear dust. And with famine comes disease. Hospitals destroyed. Pharmacies empty. Doctors dead or scattered. Plagues would spread unchecked. Simple wounds turning fatal. Children dying from infections once cured by a pill. Desperation would set in. Mothers giving their last crumbs of food to children. Neighbors stealing from neighbors. Villagers turning on each other. It is not just the body that collapses after nuclear war. It is the bonds of trust. The threads of community. The very idea of humanity. Without governments, without law, what rises in their place? Tribes. Warlords. Militias. The strongest seize weapons, fuel, medicine. They carve out territories in the ruins, enforcing power through fear. History shows us, in every collapse, from Rome to modern failed states, new orders emerge. After nuclear war, it would be no different. Only harsher. Only bloodier. And in this fractured world, the old ideals of democracy, communism, capitalism, would mean nothing. Only survival. Only strength. This is the haunting question. Could survivors rebuild civilization? Some argue yes. That humans are resourceful. That, given time, small communities could plant crops, generate power, and restore knowledge. But there's a problem. The infrastructure of modern life, power plants, satellites, factories, would be gone. The internet, gone. Global trade, gone. Even basic technologies, like antibiotics or fuel, would vanish once supplies ran out. How do you rebuild advanced society without the tools to make tools? How do you restore an industrial world from the ashes? It might take centuries. Millennia. Or perhaps, it might never happen. Borders would fade. Flags would lose meaning. The concept of United States or Soviet Union would be irrelevant. Instead, isolated pockets of humanity, separated by ruined wastelands, would struggle to survive. Language would fracture. Culture would collapse. Generations born after the war might not even know what caused the darkness. They would grow up in a mythic wasteland, told stories of the fire from the sky that ended the old world. And yet, there is another possibility. That humanity itself wouldn't survive at all. Nuclear winter could last not months, but decades. Oceans poisoned, forests gone. The food chain collapsing from the bottom up. With no crops, no livestock, no fish, humanity starves. Entire populations disappear. The last survivors huddle in caves, waiting for a spring that never comes. And then, silence. The human story, ended by its own hand. Why does this vision matter? Because it isn't science fiction. It's not fantasy. It's the very scenario modeled by scientists, simulated by military planners, and feared by leaders. And while the Cold War stayed cold, the weapons still exist. Thousands of warheads, enough to burn the Earth many times over, remain armed and ready. The apocalypse imagined in the 20th century could still be our future. Imagine a night sky, once filled with stars, now hidden behind a curtain of black smoke. No moonlight. No sunrise. Only endless, suffocating darkness. This is the reality of nuclear winter, the shadow of death cast across Earth after the Cold War's nightmare came true. The first weeks after the bombs, the initial weeks following a global nuclear exchange, would be pure chaos. Millions dead in the blasts. Millions more burned, blinded, or crushed in collapsing cities. Hospitals gone. Governments paralyzed. Power grids obliterated. Across the United States, Europe, and the Soviet Union, the nuclear heartlands, survivors stumble through rubble searching for food, water, and shelter. Radiation poisoning spreads. Those exposed vomit, bleed, and collapse in waves of agony. Doctors, those who survived, run out of medicine within days. But death doesn't stop with the blast. It's only beginning. The mushroom clouds weren't the end. They were the beginning of fallout. Tiny radioactive particles drift through the atmosphere, carried by winds. Some settle locally, blanketing destroyed cities with lethal dust. Others travel thousands of miles, falling silently over regions that never saw a bomb. Rain turns deadly. Rivers glow with invisible poison. Crops rot in irradiated soil. In rural villages far from Moscow, peasants inhale dust carried from Warsaw. In Kansas, farmers watch cattle collapse from tainted grass. In Japan, children play in light rain, unaware it carries the same radiation that once haunted Hiroshima. Fallout doesn't just kill quickly. It lingers. It contaminates food chains. It ensures that survival is temporary. Firestorms and the birth of nuclear winter, but the most catastrophic effect comes not from radiation, but from fire. Every bomb ignites infernos. Entire cities burn like torches. Moscow, London, New York, all consumed by unstoppable firestorms. As these cities burn, vast plumes of black soot rise into the stratosphere. Unlike smoke from normal fires, this soot doesn't wash away with rain. It stays. It spreads. It wraps the earth in a dark shroud. Sunlight dims. Temperatures plummet. Crops fail. This is nuclear winter. The planet, once full of life, begins to resemble Mars. Frozen. Silent. Without food, societies unravel. In Europe, surviving NATO nations fragment. Governments lose control. Hungry mobs storm remaining warehouses, killing for a loaf of bread. In the Soviet Union, the once mighty Red Army degenerates into warlord factions, hoarding fuel and canned goods. Soldiers trade bullets for bread. In the United States, cities that survive the blasts descend into anarchy. Militias rise. States secede. Washington lies in ruins, leaving power vacuums across the country. China, India, and much of the global south, though not directly bombed in many scenarios, face their own catastrophe. Nuclear winter halts monsoons. Crops die. Famine spreads faster than any army. Billions starve. This isn't speculation. Scientists in the 1980s, like Carl Sagan, warned that even a limited nuclear exchange could cause the end of civilization as we know it. His studies predicted average global temperatures could drop by as much as 20 degrees Celsius. That's colder than the Ice Age. Imagine crops trying to grow under freezing, sunless skies. Imagine ecosystems collapsing as plants die, animals starve. And humans become scavengers. Nuclear winter was the silent killer, waiting behind the bombs. And if the Cold War had gone hot, it would have arrived. Yet, not everyone dies immediately. Some survive. But survival isn't life. It's a brutal fight. In remote bunkers, political elites, the so-called doomsday survivors, eat canned goods and filtered water, far removed from the chaos outside. But their power means nothing in a world without electricity, trade, or obedient citizens. In mountain villages, small communities band together, relying on stored food, wood fires, and old traditions. Yet their survival is fragile. One bad harvest, one raiding band, one contaminated river, and they fall. The question isn't who survives. The question is, what kind of world is left? The fear of mutually assured destruction realized the doctrine that kept peace during the Cold War, mutually assured destruction, worked because neither side dared to risk it. But in this alternate history, it happened. The world leaders who pushed the button realized too late that there were no winners. No victorious nation. No spoils of war. Only ashes. Humanity reduced to ashes by the end of the first year. Global population collapses. From billions to perhaps hundreds of millions. Most major cities lie in ruins. Nations vanish. The great monuments of the 20th century, the Kremlin, the White House, the Eiffel Tower, either flattened by bombs or crumbling in abandoned silence. Survivors whisper about the old world. But children born after the war never see sunlight, never eat fresh fruit, never know what normal life was. The Cold War that became hot didn't just kill people. It killed civilization itself. Picture Earth, not as a blue marble in space, but as a scarred, blackened rock. Cities erased. Nations dissolved. And yet, amid the ashes, small fires of survival flicker. The question is, what rises next? Civilization or savagery? After the nuclear firestorm, Earth is quieter than it has ever been. The skies are dark. The oceans, poisoned. Once bustling cities are graveyards of steel and stone. But in the silence, scattered communities endure. They're not nations anymore. They're tribes, clans, fragments of humanity clinging to existence. The great superpowers are gone. There's no United States. No Soviet Union. No NATO. No Warsaw Pact. Just scattered survivors, carrying the weight of history's greatest failure. Deep underground, the remnants of governments emerge from bunkers. In America, continuity of government programs, secret facilities like Mount Weather and Raven Rock, hold generals, politicians, and planners. They step into a dead world, clutching emergency manuals written in the 1960s. In Moscow, surviving Politburo members crawl out of hardened shelters near the Urals. They expect to resume command of a Red Empire. But here's the cruel irony. Their nations no longer exist. Their radios crackle with silence. Their armies are gone. Their citizens are dust. A title means nothing in a world without people to rule. In the ruins of civilization, power no longer comes from ideology. It comes from survival resources. A man with food, clean water, and weapons becomes a leader. In the United States, militias and survivalist groups form warlord enclaves. They seize gas stations, farms, and small towns. In Eastern Europe, remnants of Soviet divisions transform into roaming bands, enforcing their rule over starving villages. The line between soldier and raider blurs. In Asia and Africa, where direct nuclear strikes were limited, chaos still spreads. Famine and fallout devastate populations. Local strongmen rise, often fueled by old ethnic tensions or religious fervor. The world enters a new dark age. Many believe the so-called Third World would survive better, since fewer bombs targeted it. But survival is relative. Countries like Brazil, Mexico, Or Nigeria might escape direct annihilation, but nuclear winter doesn't care about borders. Crops fail worldwide. Even if the soil remains untouched, the global trade networks collapse. Factories have no spare parts. Ships have no fuel. Medical supply chains vanish. Starvation and disease claim more lives than the bombs ever did. Yet, in these regions, with larger rural populations and traditional farming knowledge, chances of long-term survival are higher. These nations may hold the seeds of humanity's future. Nuclear war doesn't just erase people. It erases progress. The power grids? Gone. Satellites? Disabled. Internet? A memory. Factories lie in ruins. Fuel reserves dwindle. In less than a decade, the world slips backwards by centuries. Imagine doctors performing surgery without anesthesia. Farmers tilling fields with wooden plows. Communities defending themselves with spears because bullets ran out. The 20th century collapses into a medieval nightmare. But even in this darkness, humanity adapts. In remote valleys, survivors rediscover old skills: foraging, herbal medicine, hand-weaving. In the Andes, small villages retreat into mountains, shielded from fallout. They plant potatoes in narrow terraces, just as their ancestors did centuries ago. In rural India, farming communities turn inward, living on rice, lentils, and traditional water systems. In the Arctic, indigenous peoples, who never relied heavily on modern technology, thrive better than urban survivors. Their knowledge of hunting, fishing, and survival proves invaluable. The irony: those most disconnected from the modern world may inherit what remains of it. After such devastation, many turn to faith. Some see the apocalypse as divine punishment. Prophets emerge, claiming visions and promising salvation. In shattered Europe, cults arise around surviving relics of the old world: a glowing church cross, a crater spared from bombs. In America, fundamentalist groups frame the war as the cleansing fire, a chance to rebuild a God-fearing society. In the Middle East and South Asia, Islam, Hinduism, and Christianity serve as anchors for shattered communities, but also as rallying cries for new conflicts. Faith becomes both salvation and a weapon. Here's the sobering truth: democracy requires stability, communication, and trust, none of which exist in a post-nuclear wasteland. What rises instead? Strongmen, tribes, dictatorships, rule by gun and grain. The Cold War was fought to defend ideologies: capitalism versus communism, freedom versus control. But after the bombs, those ideologies crumble. Survival trumps politics. Perhaps centuries later, democracy might return. But in the immediate aftermath, power is brutal, simple, and unforgiving. Imagine Earth 100 years after the war. The old nations are myths. Ruins of skyscrapers are overgrown with forests. The descendants of survivors live in fortified villages, telling stories of the great fire that ended the old world. Archaeologists of the future, survivors with no training, only curiosity, dig through ruins of highways and nuclear bunkers, mistaking them for temples of forgotten gods. It's a world where humanity is not extinct, but permanently scarred. A world forever changed by the folly of the Cold War ended. The Soviet Union fell. The Berlin Wall crumbled. And yet, the world is still one decision away from nuclear fire. The nightmare that almost happened in 1962, 1983, or 1989 could still happen tonight. When the Cold War ended in 1991, billions of people breathed a sigh of relief. No more duck and cover drills. No more sirens. No more doomsday clocks flashing near midnight. But here's the harsh truth: the weapons didn't vanish. Today, over 12,000 nuclear warheads still exist across the globe. The United States, Russia, China, France, the UK, India, Pakistan, North Korea, and possibly Israel all maintain stockpiles. Humanity escaped the Cold War without global annihilation. But the tools of apocalypse remain, waiting. Throughout history, near misses nearly ended civilization. 1962, Cuban Missile Crisis. One Soviet submarine officer, Vasily Arkhipov, refused to launch a nuclear torpedo. His decision may have saved the world. 1983, Soviet false alarm. A computer error told Soviet command that US missiles were incoming. Officer Stanislav Petrov chose not to retaliate. He trusted his instincts and prevented World War III. 1995, Norwegian rocket incident. Russia mistook a research rocket for a possible US nuclear strike. Boris Yeltsin activated the nuclear briefcase. For a terrifying moment, the world stood seconds away from launch. The lesson? The line between peace and annihilation is often one human decision. Today, the Cold War may be history. But nuclear tension lives on. United States and Russia still hold more than 90 of the world's nuclear weapons. Relations remain strained, with new tensions in Eastern Europe and the Arctic. China, rapidly expanding its arsenal, seeking to challenge US supremacy. India and Pakistan, locked in decades of hostility. A single border clash could escalate into nuclear exchange. North Korea, developing long-range missiles capable of reaching the US and Japan. Iran, though not confirmed to have nuclear weapons, its program keeps the Middle East on edge. The Cold War ended. But the nuclear age never did. Unlike the 20th century, today's threats are multiplied by technology. Cyber warfare could hack into early warning systems, triggering false alarms. Artificial intelligence might be integrated into nuclear decision-making, reducing human oversight. Hypersonic missiles, faster than anything in the Cold War, leave almost no time to verify if an attack is real before deciding to retaliate. The hair-trigger world of the Cold War has only become more dangerous. And yet, for all the missiles, computers, and warheads, the future still comes down to people. Vasily Arkhipov. Stanislav Petrov. Leaders who chose restraint instead of panic. The next crisis will also depend on individuals, presidents, generals, operators at computer screens. A single misjudgment, and history ends. It's a fragile system. Terrifyingly fragile. Even if nuclear war never happens, the question remains, why do we still build these weapons? Some argue deterrence works. That fear prevents war. That's why there was no World War III during the Cold War. Others argue deterrence is gambling with humanity's survival. One mistake, one accident, one miscalculation, and deterrence becomes destruction. Do nuclear weapons keep the peace, or only postpone the inevitable? Listen to those who did endure nuclear fire, the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They described skin melting. Shadows burned into walls. Generations poisoned by radiation. And those were just 2 bombs. Modern warheads are thousands of times stronger. The Hibakusha, survivors, became living reminders of what nuclear fire really means. Their plea to the world was simple: never again. Yet, the stockpiles grew larger. The weapons became deadlier. And the world kept walking the tightrope. Today, the doomsday clock, maintained by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, stands at 90 seconds to midnight. The closest it has ever been. Closer than during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Closer than during Able Archer. Closer than at any point in human history. The message is clear: humanity is running out of time. If the Cold War taught us anything, it's this: nuclear war has no winners. Only survivors in ruins. One person's decision can save, or doom, billions. The greatest danger isn't malice, but mistakes. The Cold War that almost became World War III should serve as a warning carved into history's stone. But warnings only matter if we listen. So here's the haunting truth. We've imagined what would happen if the Cold War turned nuclear. We've walked through firestorms, fallout, famine, and ruin. But remember this: that world never happened. Not because it couldn't, but because humanity was lucky. Luck is not a strategy. The question remains, will we finally learn? Or will the nightmare someday come true? If this journey through history and imagination moved you, share it. Discuss it. Spread awareness. Because the only way to prevent nuclear war is to make sure no generation forgets how close we already came. Like, comment, subscribe. Let's keep history alive and keep the future safe.